Justin Wilkes, Policy Director for the European Wind Energy Association. We're here at a Fondation EurActiv event, a stakeholder workshop in Brussels, where we've been discussing renewables, solar power more specifically, but renewables generally. One of the conversations that came up relates to grids. With renewable energy, there's going to be clearly a change required in the way that energy is transported. Would you explain a little more on what EWEA is involved in?
It's absolutely vital, of course, when you are changing your electricity production technologies from conventional technologies to renewable technologies, that you will need to build and operate your grid in a different way. For example, when you're building your grid, you're going to be building wind farms in areas where there is a good wind resource. That might not necessarily be where there's a large number of consumers or industry, in which case you're going to then need to build a grid to connect your areas of production with your areas of consumption, and it's therefore absolutely critical that the European Union is devising a financing system that encourages the building of grids, and particularly cross-border grids where necessary.
This building of new grids, do you think it's possible for it to be done in a cost-effective way? I mean, this must be one of the challenges, one would presume.
Certainly, the key issue is how do you integrate large quantities of renewables, particularly wind power, into a grid in the most cost-effective way. And the answer to that is by building grids, particularly cross-border grids. If you are able to utilize low marginal cost production of wind power, and you're able to transport that electricity to wherever the consumers are who need it at that time, you're able to reduce substantially your system operation costs that consumers are currently paying, and that allows you to finance the grid. It gives you an economic justification for building your grid. For example, there was a grid built recently between Norway and the Netherlands that has a lifetime of 70 years and has a payback time of 4 to 5 years. So clearly the economics are there for building new grids. What is necessary is to ensure that there's some form of regulated rate of return and the provision of upfront financing, and that's why we're looking to the European Commission and the European Investment Bank to come up with those innovative financing vehicles.
Clearly one of the real issues for renewables is that the places where the renewables appear isn't always where the general population is. For example, the Sahara has more solar power or solar energy than we could ever imagine, but there aren't huge numbers of people there. In the same way for wind technology, the majority will be being built offshore. What sort of requirements for infrastructure will these create, do you think?
Certainly when you're building offshore wind, and we'll also, don't forget, be building a lot of onshore wind in the years ahead as well, but we're looking at a project pipeline of over 100 gigawatts of offshore wind, much of that in the North Sea, but also in the Baltic and the Mediterranean Sea, and that will supply 10% of Europe's electricity. It's therefore absolutely vital that we're using the most modern grid technology available to us, that we're allowing wind farms to connect into electricity cables that are there for import-export purposes, as that will allow for a much more effective use of those cables and transport wind power's production much more effectively. So that's the key question of how do you build your grid to coincide with the massive build-out of offshore wind farms that we're expecting in the next 20 years or so.
Justin, thank you very much. Very interesting. Thanks for your time.